Hi Acadiana, I'm Meteorologist Dave Baker. Welcome to your Tuesday. This is Let's Talk Tropics, a nice discussion on what's going on out in the tropical world, plus what could be coming along. If you notice there on the left-hand side of your screen, we have no coordinates. PTC number 8 has fallen apart, moved inland. No worries there, except for a little bit of leftover rain and some gusty winds that are currently moving over parts of the Carolinas. And then on top of that, Tropical Depression Gordon, the National Hurricane Center has put out its last advisory. It is now moved down to a non-tropical low-pressure area, so it is no longer a tropical system out there in the Atlantic Ocean. So right now we have nothing, but it is still the middle of hurricane season, and we're still right here in the peak of the hurricane season. So models are suggesting some development coming up next week. So this week is not going to be busy, but next week very well could be, based on some of the models that I'm looking at and also some of the agreement that I'm seeing between some of the models here. It's a long way out, and there's going to be a lot of changes, but I do think there's going to be something that could be developing over the Western Caribbean going into next week. Right now we've got a mix of sun and clouds. Our temperature 90 here in Lafayette. That heat index pushing 100. It's at 98. Dew point at 73, and our relative humidity now 58%, with a nice breeze out of the west at 10 miles per hour, and the pressure holding at 29.92. We do have some showers that are out there developing with some of the daytime heating. A few showers up here over parts of the inland parishes, Evangeline, northern parts of St. Landry Parish. A little shower there east of Leonville. We've got another shower there south of Henderson. And then we've got some rains that are pushing over the basin areas of lower parts of St. Martin and far eastern portions of Iberia Parish and into St. Mary as well. And it looks like a couple of showers are trying to get going here along the coast down into Cameron and Vermilion. So the rain chance is going to hold at about 30% for you today. And looking at the traffic cams, no rain on I-10, but there's a shower there just to the south of Henderson. So the camera a little bit darker there, and then there you can see that we've got some clouds that are out there mixing in with the sunshine, but no rain on the roadways right now. But you'll probably encounter a stray shower if you're going to be out and about across Acadiana today. Well, just 5 or 6 days ago we had a landfalling Category 2 hurricane. And look at Louisiana now when it comes to the power outages. Actually, earlier it was down to about 300 customers, but now it's up to about 1,200. Not exactly sure, but it's a few dozen here and there over parts of Terrebonne, Lafourche, Assumption, Ascension, and then pushing eastward over to around St. Charles Parish. But after about 5 days, that is some really a remarkable recovery when it comes to the power outages, because there for a while there were about 1 million folks that were without power shortly after the landfall of Hurricane Francine a little less than a week ago. And what's left of Francine is still kind of spinning here over south parts of the south, right about in there, and it's all part of a larger upper trough. And then what you got left here is what's left of PTC number 8. So the two of these are going to kind of get caught up in a fairly broad trough of low pressure that's over the east coast, and that's going to start to move off toward the east. So as high pressure begins to build in from the west, we'll see a little less coverage of the afternoon showers and a lot more sunshine with some fairly warm temperatures for the rest of the week. And out in the Gulf of Mexico, a relatively quiet day. We do have some gusty winds around thunderstorms that will develop, but as a general rule, westerly winds at about 10 knots and seas running about 2 to 3 feet. Some showers and thunderstorms there along the Florida coast, and we've got some showers off the South Florida coast, and that extends out with a frontal boundary across the middle part of the Gulf of Mexico. But for the most part, things are pretty quiet there over the Gulf of Mexico, and I think they'll stay that way for several days. And then off on the east coast, what's left of a potential tropical depression or tropical cyclone number 8 is right about in there. It did not get a name, so We are stuck on Gordon as the final name. The next storm that will develop will be Helene, so we'll be watching out for that. Central American satellite, we've got a trough of low pressure and a bit of a tropical wave that's now moving here across portions of the western part of Central America. Right about in there, there's a bit of a tropical wave, and that's generating some thunderstorms there in the Pacific Ocean. And then we've got a little more of a tropical wave that's kind of here, and that's developing some showers, some thunderstorms there along the Central American coast from Nicaragua down to Costa Rica and into Panama. And as far as the rest of the Caribbean Sea, things are relatively quiet out there again too. But the areas that we're going to be watching maybe in a week or so, probably about right in here, there's a lot of models that are indicating some deepening low pressure here. Not exactly sure what it's going to come from just yet, whether it's an upper trough that moves across there or a tropical wave that will move off toward the west, but models are suggesting some tropical development in that particular area in about a week's time. And then here is Gordon, or at least what's left of Gordon. Gordon is now a non-tropical low pressure center. The National Hurricane Center putting out its last position there as of 11 o'clock. So it had winds down to 30 miles per hour, 19.5 north, 49.1 west, with winds at about 30 and kind of drifting around there. I know they're going to continue to watch that. There were some earlier suggestions that maybe it might work its way back to a tropical storm, but it looks like it's so disorganized now that the National Hurricane Center has gone ahead and dropped all the advisories, and really nothing else to show up here for the next 7 days. But remember, it is still hurricane season, and it won't take long for something else to start to fire up. And I really think this area here is going to be the place to watch come about 6 or 7 days from now. And part of the reason it is part of the Atlantic Basin that is still really primed when it comes to the water temperatures. It really hasn't had, since Beryl, we really haven't had anything major go through there. So not only are the waters warm, but those waters go fairly deep with 80-degree temperatures. The shear is relatively high here over the northern part of the Gulf of Mexico, so no development's going to happen here. But we've got some relatively low wind shear here in the development zone of parts of the Caribbean, as well as the western part of the Atlantic. So could that be the next area for development? Well, a lot of the models do think so. So we're going to start with the 10-day outlook on the GFS. And nothing happening in the immediate future, but as we go 4 or 5 days down the road, watch this particular area there. You see a bit of a low pressure develop over the western Caribbean and then kind of lift off toward Florida. The Euro also showing a bit of a pressure drop over the western part of the Caribbean and going into the eastern part of the Gulf of Mexico here toward the end. So we're talking about Wednesday of next week. Tuesday, Wednesday of next week is where we start to see the signs of a low pressure area. And then you see that low kind of starts to meander its way in the eastern part of the Gulf of Mexico. So the Euro model is a little bit older than the GFS. The GFS is just kind of hot off the presses. The Euro model goes out 10 days every other model run. So we're going to have to wait for the 12Z to come down. Now the Canadian's 12Z model has been showing something developing, or at least the Canadian model has been showing something trying to develop in this area now for about 2 to 3 days, and it's still pretty robust on a low pressure area developing over the western part of the Caribbean, and very similar to what we're seeing with the GFS, perhaps something shifting northward into the Gulf of Mexico. Again, there are going to be a lot of changes here, but what we do in the early part of the forecast is we go through the different global models to see if there's any agreement. And I will say that there is at least some agreement with pressures dropping over the western part of the Caribbean toward the middle and latter part of next week. And the Icon model only goes out 7 days, so we're going to be a little bit more limited here, but you can see there's a low starting to develop near the Yucatan, but this one kind of works its way a little bit farther toward the west. But I will say in pretty much all 4 models, there is a front that's starting to come in here from the west, and it's a pretty significant front too, maybe actually get us some cooler temperatures. But again, the timing on this is really hard to pin down because we're talking about 7 to 10 days. If a front starts to come in from this area, then that would concur with the other models of pulling something northward and move it over toward Florida rather than having it head toward the western part of the Gulf of Mexico. So let's stop each one of these models a week from today just to show you the agreement that there is low pressure forecast to develop. So there's the GFS. There's the Euro model. So you see you've got low pressure that's developing there over the western part of the Caribbean Sea. So right about in that particular area. So the GFS and the Euro both have lower pressures in that area a week from today. Throw in the Canadian, you've already got a tropical system. So the Canadian is developing something just a little bit faster, but notice there's 3 models at the same time that are in agreement that you're going to have lowering pressures over the western part of the Caribbean Sea. And the Icon has lower pressure over the Yucatan. So when you compare the 4 models, you've got the GFS with low pressure closer to Cuba, the Euro with low pressure about halfway between Cuba and the Yucatan, low pressure with actually a tropical system from the Canadian model, same places where the GFS has low pressure, and then the Icon a little bit farther toward the west. But again, most models are indicating a cold front coming in. So as you take the GFS all the way out a week from this coming Thursday, September the 26th. So remember, you've got low pressure developing over the western part of the Caribbean about a week from today, and then about 10 days out, you've got a landfalling tropical system on the Florida coast, which again would indicate that maybe there's a cold front that would be pulling across this part of the region that would spin it in more of a northeasterly direction. So that's what the GFS is settling on about 10 days from now. The Euro doesn't quite go out that far, but on Thursday you can see there's maybe a tropical depression over the eastern part of the Gulf of Mexico. And then the Canadian model is very similar to the GFS with a tropical system making landfall over Florida about 10 days from now. So remember, the models are going to change considerably between now and 10 days. But what we're watching right now is some agreement, how this forecast is evolving, and if you see certain models that are trending with similar solutions, then you start to buy in just a little bit. So again, not for sure this is probably not going to be the final solution 10 days from now, but at the very least we're starting to see some agreement in models within a week. And then we're also seeing extended forecasts of certain models that seem to be agreeing on a tropical system in the eastern part of the Gulf of Mexico. So that's what we have for you, and that's what we're going to be watching over the next several days to see how the computer models evolve, if we see more agreement or if we see less agreement. But I would still, if you've got all your supplies, if you were not affected by Hurricane Francine and you still have a lot of those supplies, keep them handy because it is September and it is a very, very busy month. Now, the Global Tropical Hazards Outlook, we'll get a refresh here a little bit later on today, and I just refreshed it, so it still says September the 10th. So we're going to get a new version of this, and I really wouldn't be surprised to see this part of the area really kind of light up here for week 2 when we get the next thing. But remember, week 3, which was issued last week, was showing something developing here in that range of the September 25th. So the week 3 experimental outlook from last week, I wouldn't be surprised to see something develop there. So it might be on to something here. And of course, tomorrow I'll have the updated version and be able to show that to you. And September is always the busiest month. Anywhere that's in the orange or the red, you've had more than 50 tropical systems pass through those areas since 1944. And I believe that this particular graphic goes up to 2020. So you're not getting 2021's Ida, and you're not getting any of the other hurricanes that were across the Gulf of Mexico in 2022 and 2023. So there are more that have cruised through this area prior to 1944 and since 2020. So September is a very, very busy month, and normally we get several tropical systems to develop. And so far, we've already had 2 named storms develop during the month of September. And we could see another one develop here sometime next week. So keep your guard up because hurricane season is far from over. Well, I hope you enjoy Let's Talk Tropics. If you do, like this video and subscribe to my channel. Tell your friends too, and turn on those notifications. That way you know when the morning forecast hits on Acadiana Weather Today, weekday mornings at 7:30, and of course when Let's Talk Tropics airs live at noon right here on Acadiana Weather Today on this YouTube channel. And don't forget to follow my social media pages on Facebook and X. I'm Meteorologist Dave Baker. I hope you enjoy the rest of your Tuesday, and I will see you early tomorrow morning for Acadiana Weather Today at 7:30 right here on YouTube on Wednesday morning.